right now it's very common to compare Hitler, compare Donald Trump with Hitler. I mean, I think that we need to kind of back away from this. Um, when I was in high school and Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the media and everybody said Saddam Hussein is like Hitler. And when Milosevic was having a fight, and there was a debate about what he was doing in terms of his activities, and whether there was ethnic cleansing or not, what was going on in Kosovo, everybody said we have to intervene because Milosevic is like Hitler. And I remember when I was working at a bookstore, and there was a big picture of Bill Clinton, um, and it had his book that he wrote. I think it was called his autobiography, My Life. And one of my conservative coworkers went up to the picture and put his finger there like this, and he looked at me and he goes, "I want to write on the top my struggle," which is what the word Mein Kampf means. In other words, he was making Bill Clinton to be like Hitler. And currently, Israelis will call Palestinians Nazis, and Palestinians will call Israelis Nazis. And we just have a kind of popular discourse, not just in the United States, that wherever there is a bad person, someone that looks like a dictator who has racism, we just go Hitler. Now, I think that this is a little bit strange in that I teach world history. There have been many, many dictators that have race-based ideologies and are militaristic and have did very terrible things. And I get what people are saying, but I think that it's not a productive thing to point out. I mean, by the way, Bush was depicted as Hitler as well. I mean, we can keep going on and on, right? That's just who we name drop. I mean, what's interesting is that Donald Trump actually said he liked this quote from Mussolini, and he said, "Oh, I don't care. I just like to be associated with great quotes." That was his way. But he basically, tongue in cheek, it's clear that Donald Trump likes that kind of strong man leadership. He likes to be like a Putin, kind of a man of strength on the screen and a bravado. And it's interesting that he doesn't even get compared to Mussolini. I mean, why not? Mussolini. But it's funny because there's almost this lack of any kind of like real discourse on what various types of leaders have practiced and how that would relate to or not a particular political leader. Okay. And I think it'd be actually more productive to actually even ask, what influenced Hitler. Hitler actually had very mainstream views in many circles throughout North America and in Europe. His views about Jews, his anti-Semitism, was a very commonplace type of racism within European and American circles. His ideas of eugenics, about creating a stronger race of people, was coming out of American academic circles. And his militarism and his fears of feeling like his state was locked down and locked in. I mean, and if you think about it, Britain and France, they used their militaries to conquer people of color all around the world, and they used racial theories to justify these things. I mean, Rudyard Kipling, the guy who wrote The Jungle Book, had a poem called The White Man's Burden. I mean, Hitler was basically saying it's not fair that Germany is not getting more of this, that we're getting cut off from the spoils of pillage from these colonial adventures, right? Okay, so it might serve us better if we're going to use illustrations of people to try to point out the problem with something. It might also be good to kind of like reflect more widely on these things to maybe analyze ourselves. I mean, I have Hitler's Mein Kampf here. I have lots of literature. and this is what he said in his book. North America, this is Hitler's manifesto, his Mein Kampf. Okay, North America, whose population consists in by far the largest part of Germanic elements, who mix but little with the lowered colored people, shows a different humanity and culture from Central and South America, where the predominantly Latin immigrants often mixed with the Aboriginals on a large scale. By this one example, we can clearly and distinctly recognize the effect of racial mixture. The Germanic inhabitant of the American continent, who has remained racially pure and unmixed, rose to be master of the continent. He will remain the master as long as he does not fall a victim of defilement of the blood. Now, we need to really pause and think about what he's saying. He didn't need to make it very explicit there. It was understood. How did the American Germanic predominant white race be so strong, the dominant force in North America? It was the genocide. It was the Holocaust of natives. That's just a fact. There's no dispute. This is not revisionist history. It's not liberals saying, oh, hate on ourselves for being an Americans. But it's a fact. And so I think the legacy of Hitler is more chilling and actually what influenced him. We should really kind of look at our own self-reflection and think about some of the ideas that were floating around at the time that were mainstream. But what made him so dangerous? And the problem with Hitler is he took all these ideas and he made them go to their natural conclusion. He basically said, if we're all agreeing that handicapped people and that Jews and that and blah, 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 and all these other groups of people shouldn't exist in our society, then let's make them not. Whoa. He actually just fell through with this idea. Okay. Now, in that case, we should always remind ourselves that the lesson for me of Hitler is that mainstream ideas that have the seeds of something very dark and sinister are what leads to the rise of people who are going to actually call you out on that, and they're going to take it to the next level. Okay, that's really what I think we should look at. Now, in the case of Trump, I think we have a more recent example of someone he's like, and I read an article, which I'm going to post underneath this, that somebody pointed this out actually a lot earlier, is that he's much more like Berlusconi, who dominated for nearly a decade Italian politics as the prime minister. He was a rich buffoon. He was obnoxious, sexist. He eventually got in trouble and caught with having sexual relationships with like an underage Moroccan prostitute. He said terrible things about women. He promised to make Italy great again in terms of saying, hey, I'm a rich tycoon. He owned like almost all the media stations and said, I'll bring you the kind of wealth that I have. Well, he didn't. He made Italy look very shameful, and it was a disaster for Italy. And so I would actually say that that Donald Trump has much more of a relationship to Berlusconi, who you should look up, and his legacy and recent history. Another person that I think he should be compared to, if you want to talk about modern times, is, and it's a less direct, is Rabbi Meir Kahane from Israel. He died. He was actually assassinated by a Palestinian, but he was a man who incited a lot of violence. The saying, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. I'm not saying he should have been killed. I'm simply saying that he was a person who instigated a lot. But within Israeli politics, by the way, his life was he died in 1990. He's born in the 30s. Okay, just want to clarify the time frame where he's at. Okay, but he was not like. There's certain things he wasn't like Trump. He was a very intellectual man. This rabbi was very articulate and very sharp, and in a way that I wouldn't compare to almost anybody right now. But what he ended up doing is he rose to power within Israel. He came from the United States, from New York, and then he actually created his own party, the Koch party, a political party, a right-wing party, and he espoused very radical views, and he was actually removed his banned for being a racist by Israeli politics. But here's what's interesting to me. It was the Israeli right that really turned on him. And I studied him in my grad school class. I read some of his books, his articles. I watched his debates, and I read about him. He was actually originally very much supported by the right wing in Israel, and he didn't really say much things different than the Israeli establishment. But he said a lot of things out loud that made them look bad. He basically said that all Palestinians should be expelled, and that Jews wouldn't have a justification for being in Palestine. If they aren't justified kicking out the Arabs in the West Bank, they weren't justified in kicking them out originally. And he actually made all the arguments that the pro-Palestinian camp made. He said, "Yeah, we kicked out the Palestinians to make land for Israel. Yes, we did." He goes, "What self-respecting Arab would want to live in an Israeli state?" That basically shames him. And because I'm not a racist, is what he would try to say, and I know that a Palestinian Israeli, an Israeli Arab has self-respect, they're only going to attack us because they're not going to want to be discriminated against and shamed, and henceforth that's why they have to believe, right? He said all these kind of things that made discourse very awkward, and they didn't like the way he was making them look. It's interesting that while he was condemned and turned against by the establishment, that his really extreme rhetoric and his lifestyle is now pretty much mainstream Israeli politics. He brought something in that, he upped the bar of the rhetoric and the ideas. And many who are in power are former Kahanists now. And Netanyahu really functions quite under the platform of what Kahane was doing. And so one of the things that we should be fearful of Trump is that by his discourse and what he's brought into the American politics he's brought the rhetoric so high to discrimination, to violence and of minorities, and his opinions about things, that many of the Republicans may feel that they're not going to be electable unless they're up closer to that level, right? Okay, so we're really kind of in some grim times, and many political leaders in the world are quite awful right now, as many have always been. And I think that my comparison of Trump to Rabbi Kahane's legacy and to Berlusconi has its limitations. These kind of comparisons always have their limitations, and they have sometimes their advantages. But I think that the Hitler-Nazi comparisons, sometimes they have their value, but I think that we need to just, we need to analyze our own history. We need to start looking at our own actions. We need to start looking at other people's actions for what they are, and we need to really kind of question what we are actually allowing into the discourse to begin with. And I think that would be a more helpful way of moving forward than what I see in normal discourse now. So that's just my thoughts on that. Peace out, y'all.